Hey, Cut the Shit listeners. You can find every episode on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or YouTube. Go check us out. Welcome back, everybody. You're listening to Cut the Shit, a podcast series that aims to take a closer look at the impact of the IT industry, both the good and the bad. Cut the Shit is brought to you by Plow Networks, a managed IT services company based just outside Nashville, Tennessee. I'm Bryan Link, COO here at Plow, and I'll be your host for this series. I'll ask questions, and with the help of our guests, try to dig deep on some of the key challenges we all face dealing with IT. So with that, let's cut the shit and get started. On today's episode, I am very excited to have Shannon Farrington as our guest. Shannon is CFO at Premise Health, a direct healthcare provider based in Nashville, Tennessee. Shannon has over 25 years experience as a healthcare CFO, so she has had a front row seat to the massive technology changes that have taken place in healthcare during that time. Shannon is one of the savviest finance execs in healthcare, so I took every opportunity I could to cover a lot of different topics, including some of the key tech transformations she has witnessed during her career, the importance of trust between finance and IT leaders, and the joys and challenges of starting a high-growth technology business, which she did about 15 years ago. I had lots more questions to ask, but I had to let Shannon go back to work, so maybe we can get her to come back for a round two in the future. I hope you enjoy my conversation with Shannon Farrington. Shannon Farrington, welcome to Cut the Shit. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm okay. It's good to see you too. Thanks for joining. We appreciate you taking the time. We got a lot to talk about today. I could probably pick your brain for hours about the stuff that you know best, because I think it's super enlightening for the kinds of folks that listen to this podcast. Although we do have some finance people who listen to the podcast, but it's mostly technology folks. So I think they oftentimes wonder what you guys are thinking about and how you think about things over there. So maybe this will be helpful to them. But before we get to that, to get us started, how about you give us kind of a quick thumbnail sketch of your background, kind of, take us back to the early days and sort of walk us up to where you sit today.
Sure. Started my career in Dallas, Texas, with Big Four. Transferred to Nashville with Ernst back in the 80s, trying to, as they really were beginning their healthcare practice. And so,
was it still the Big Eight, or had you gone to the Big Six yet?
Still the Big Eight.
Okay.
So, aged myself. It was Arthur Young.
Ernst
they
and Whitney?
announced the merger with Ernst. So yeah, Ernst and Whitney. So long time ago. But it was a great time because healthcare, they had just transferred Mike Collada as a healthcare partner, just kind of build that practice here in Nashville. Had the opportunity to work on, some of the first CHS hospitals that Wayne Smith had purchased, but also got brought in with an LBO out of HCA for a clinical lab company. Worked on the audit side on an IPO with them, and then ultimately ended up going to work as their, corporate controller. And that was I called those my dog years. It was really only 3.5, 4 years, but we did, a secondary offering, a public debt offering. We did somewhere in the neighborhood of 35 acquisitions, small and good size, both. Crazy. It was the time when the OIG investigations into the labs happened. So we went through an OIG investigation. Ultimately, that company was sold into what is now LabCorp. But it was a Warburg Pincus, my first entree into private equity, and probably set the foundation for what my career became. Great learning experience. Didn't have a clue really what I was doing, but it was a great outcome. I got to meet Hayden, which was great. So Hayden McWhirter, our CIO now. So we've worked together for a very long time. After that, I left and went to run their, be the CFO of their reference lab. Left there, went to be the director of finance of Coventry. So on the payer side, it was a staff model HMO. Got a call from Warburg, who had funded Allied, and said, hey, come over. We're starting a company in freestanding occupational health centers. And that is one of the legacy companies to what is today Premise. if you had my business cards, I could kind of line them up. But as a lot of Nashville tech or Nashville healthcare companies have done, I really worked there until we ultimately sold it into Walgreens. I left, went and started a company that did back office technology, HR, payroll, and finance called W Squared. But Stuart Clark, who is our current CEO, outsourced his technology to us as he left also when it was sold into Walgreens. And we ultimately merged the companies back together and pulled the Take Care piece out of Walgreens a few years later, and that is Premise Health. So it's been a lot of the same people, different logos, different owners, but I've had that string of private equity all along. And I think when it comes to finance and technology intersecting, typically the investment cycles that a private equity wants to have, there's a very textbook approach to how technology and finance work together. So great experience.
Well, that's excellent. Well, that's a good background to kind of why we have you on the podcast. We can talk some about that. Before I do want to take a step back and talk some about W Squared, but before we get to that, give us just a quick snapshot of what Premise Health is and what you guys do, what problems you guys are solving.
Right. So Premise Health is the largest direct-to healthcare for large self-insured organizations or organizations that aggregate lives to do primary care, advanced primary care, and occupational health. So we deliver it to the largest organizations in the country and have been doing that for nearly 20 years. But right now it is very focused in advanced primary care. We've always been fee for value, not fee for service, which is a very different value proposition for an employer. It really does matter if we help people get stay and be well. And so that's pretty much what we do.
And that's clinics, that's Premise owned and managed clinics as well as digital delivery, I assume?
Absolutely. So we do, we deliver it on site on their location. We'll deliver it near site in the community. We deliver it virtually, virtually. So right. all of the access points for sure.
Gotcha. Okay. And so that makes sense. So that's sort of how you sort of started with this model and have kind of morphed around, but back to it in terms of the nature of what Premise does, kind of from, you mentioned even before W Squared, one of those predecessor companies.
Absolutely.
Gotcha. Okay. So let's go back to those. Let's go back to W Squared. I'm super interested in that just because, I mean, obviously you've sort of sat at the nexus of finance and technology throughout your career, but that in particular was kind of a technology play. So give us the story of W Squared and how it evolved, and then I want to ask some questions about what were some of the surprises that you found when you kind of got into it.
So I think that what we believe is when there is an early investment in any company, it is very critical that the technology and services in the back office come together in a scalable fashion. And so as we looked at whether it was the finance function, the HR function, or the technology function, those could be bundled together and delivered to smaller organizations that maybe had their first institutional round, and we could deliver that on a basis that they could rent those services. And if they got to a size where they wanted to bring it in-house, they would not have to have awkward conversations. If they sold, we could scale with them until they were sold. But ultimately, we were a safe landing place for venture or early angel investors to deliver those services to small to mid-sized companies.
And what was the technology footprint? What would have been the scope of the services?
It would have been, even the ERP that we deliver on, the financial organization. ADP was our early backbone in the HR payroll. But on the technology side, it was, different companies have different core organizations, core products that they're delivering, core applications that they're using. So, we certainly worked on the infrastructure side as well as the service delivery side to provide those back to our customers.
Gotcha. And what was the experience like being involved in starting that company and operating it? Because at that point, you weren't just a finance person, I'm guessing. This sounds more like a sort of general executive role, or maybe finance was your primary focus, but probably not the only hat, would be my guess.
Yeah, so I was the CEO at the time and was one of the founders. My sister is another W. My husband, who probably some of your constituents may know, Mark Farrington, husband, he was on the technology side, but we very aptly and smartly brought along a lot of our teammates that we'd worked with before, but we also added a lot of new great people to the organization. It was really a lot of fun. There were probably at the time that, and it's a little bit of a confusing story, but when I left, we had over 100 customers that we were delivering to, and all of them were really, in an early stage. And we've had, everything from, technology companies to healthcare companies to retail companies to, it was a purview into a lot of different businesses that all really still need that fundamental back office services and the technology that underlies it in order for them to scale their organizations. So it allowed them to focus on sales and marketing of their business while we built, kind of the foundational back end.
Gotcha. All right. Okay, so let's sort of transition kind of. Now we're thinking a little bit more of the CFO hat. You've got that hat on. And thinking back a little bit, technology's changed so much. So the answers to these questions may not be the same, but I think it's interesting to sort of think about it in that perspective. When you think back on those earlier days, when in particularly more senior level, maybe not too far back, but senior level, but before like full cloud implementation. So let's sort of take it prior to that. At what point for you did the understanding technology or having a good sense of what it was, what the tools were about and what they were supposed to be doing for the companies that you were working for, when did that become a critical part of your role? And maybe it was at the very beginning, I don't know, but I'm interested to know what your journey looked like in terms of learning about that. Because my assumption is that as an accounting person, you weren't a crack technology person. That's not what you're taught.
And I'm still not today. And so you rely and trust very heavily on your partner in that CIO role. But, back then it was building out data centers and buying servers. And so we had the technical components, you had the connections, and certainly communication were critical pieces. How you were going to deliver whatever that primary application was. I always felt like it was really important for our technology team to understand the scale. When I think about a typical private equity company, I think that that's where the marriage really came, because you have to understand, if you want the scale to occur, textbook as a private equity company wants you to do, which is to continue to leverage the same resources on a bigger book of business year over year. You have to build the underlying infrastructure and the applications in ways that can be built without having to stop and redo it every time you add some incremental growth to it. And so I think that from a finance and a technology perspective, it's really important for those teams to partner together to help each other understand what we are trying to accomplish in growing the enterprise value of your company, and what those private equity partners expect us to do. And I think that it can be hard, but, certainly, we have worked together as teams over the years. I mean, 30 years, our teams know what we need to do. And as you can probably, look at customers that, Plow has had over the years, there are companies that implement in a scalable fashion and those that don't. And if you don't think about long-term future use of the way that this implementation is going to happen, whether it's the infrastructure that it sits on or the application that's being delivered, um, you're going to spend way more money and not be successful in the eyes of the private equity owner.
Yeah.
From a shareholder.
Yeah. And my assumption was early on, and it's still true to a certain degree, but certainly not the way it used to be. The capital investment around this was probably, well, I mean, it was, I won't say it was all capital investment, but I would say a significant part of it was, right? Because you were building data centers, buying hardware, buying software. The rental model wasn't quite there yet, right? Cloud didn't exist. Sort of software as a service was in its infancy. I mean, there were a few sort of, service bureau models or whatever, but not much, right? And it was hard to make it work because the connectivity wasn't there. So the delivery was bad.
And no one thought about security. Those words were not really used in my early days, which
right.
There's that.
You use that a lot now, I'm sure. Yeah, we'll get to that. We'll get to that in just a minute. So thinking about those changes, what did you use? What was your sort of techniques or how did you stay abreast of changes in technology? Was that through constant conversation with colleagues? Was that a specific sort of educational process? How did you stay on top of that as things evolved?
Yes, I mean,
or did you? Was it important? Was it important to stay? I mean, you don't need to be an expert on everything. No one can. So,
well, typically most companies are valued on EBITDA, so the earnings, and so capital tends to be below the line. Those rental SaaS models are above the line. So, that partnership and understanding of what those were going to be, especially as they moved from one to another, I think, there were probably some, surprises in there, not shocking that, it's like, wait, what is this? We did what? But I think we quickly identified it, worked together to understand what it is. There are certainly contractual terms that, you pull in that legal partner as well to make sure that all three groups are fully aligned and understand the implication before a contract is signed for any SaaS based. And I think that, we quickly recognized that because that shift happened fairly quickly in our business. And I think that, as it began to shift and it was obvious that it was going to shift, you didn't want the duplication of the CapEx on your hardware at the same time you're paying the rental. So getting those aligned quickly was also part of our partnership.
And you mentioned it's interesting because and I'm curious to hear your perspective from the financial side of the house, particularly given your PE experience. I mean, EBITDA is a metric, right? You mentioned part of the strategy, right, was capital investments made sense because they were below the line. They didn't depress, if operating expenses depressed your EBITDA, whereas a capital investment did not. With the rise in SaaS technologies and what's happened now, you've got, I mean, the prevalence of operating expenses around technology are just significantly more than they used to be. So how have you guys, is that, I mean, I would assume that the thinking has changed some on that. It's had to, but nevertheless, EBITDA still is a really meaningful metric. So I'm just curious, do they look now at the gap between EBITDA and net to see, if it's not very big, maybe we look at this differently because they're clearly looking at op expenses. I just was curious how they think about that.
No, I mean, I think that, if you've got consistent and repetitive CapEx, whether it's the development cost or, ongoing purchase, they're going to look at it as free cash flow and discount it into your earnings the same, whether it's above or below. But, what I would say is, to the extent that there are material changes year over year because of wherever the placement is going to be on the income statement, Hayden and I, we sit down, we obviously, routinely communicate, and sometimes it's, we have to have the Shannon Hayden talk instead of the CFO CIO talk. But I would say that you have to trust that partner inherently, because you're both trying to get to the same end goal. And as long as you have that trust built and you can partner with that understanding of aligned outcome, you'll get to the right answer.
Well, and that brings up a good point, which is how much time do you spend in I mean, you maybe put on the hat of looking at a CIO. You've worked with Hayden a long time, and I obviously know Hayden. Hayden is the consummate professional. What's the knowledge level in terms of understanding of finance that a CIO has to have now? And has that changed over the course of time to be able to be effective? Because these are, you can't disaggregate a technology decision and a financial decision, right? They are attached at the hip, right?
I'm sure that you are aware Hayden actually does have a finance degree. That's his background by training. Although I would certainly say that his tech skills are very, very strong. I don't think you have to have it if you've got that trusted partner. This year in our cycle, we partnered, one of our vice presidents right along with those technology teams to make sure that there's full alignment and understanding at a very detailed level. We are undergoing some, transformational data shifts in the way that we are going to deliver our data, and so there are large dollars being spent, and those teams are, I'm sure that we have these big glass windows in our offices. I'm sure that Hayden, hides behind his monitors when David Whitfield walks by. But I do think that it is a partnership, as they're material dollars.
Yeah, and
sometimes we say, is this a healthcare company or a technology company? And you mentioned that earlier.
Yeah,
but it's not cheap. It's not cheap, and we've got to know what the numbers are going to be.
Right. And that question, is this a technology company or an X company, I think is something that gets asked a lot of places, right? Not just healthcare.
Not just healthcare.
Probably everybody, right? It's the Mark Andreessen software is eating the world, right? He didn't say it was eating specific industries, right? It's more
Exactly.
generally speaking. You mentioned a little bit about having a VP involved in some of the investments. Let's talk a little bit about the budgeting process.
Mm-hmm.
Every company does it different, so I don't necessarily want to sort of try to be prescriptive in thinking about how it ought to be done. I am curious to know how do you guys approach it, and you specifically in thinking about what has seemed to work for you and your team in terms of partnering with the technology side of the house as you prepare for budgeting, and then maybe for surprises along the way too, because knowing what we're going to do today, knowing what we're going to do now, November 2023 in November 2024 is that's a probabilistic exercise. It's not always 100% correct.
And I will tell you that we just wrapped our process. We'll have to present it to our sponsors, which is OMERS, here before Thanksgiving in the next week or so. But, our teams look at, the strategic direction that we're trying to go as a company. We look at, where our financials are and where they're going to be, what we're going to print next year. We go ahead and look at what we're going to print in 25, and, it's a balance. Nobody gets everything that they want. But I think that, prioritizing the investment dollars so that they move initiatives forward and to completion so that you can begin your next investment on whatever that will be for us, making those foundational investments to move us towards, potentially being able to take more risk. We're fee for value right now, not fee for service. So we're already a step towards that process, but truly being able to take risk is something that foundationally we'd like to be able to do, and we think could benefit us overall. The market's not ready for it right now, so we're being methodical in how we step that forward. That has a huge technology implication in every investment that we're making. And so that partnership with the VP really is looking at maybe top 10 investments while we're trying to decide which ones we would prioritize. And once we kind of understand numbers for all of them, we'll make decisions to pare it down and then roll those through our numbers. And so, get that, does it meet the market need for what our product needs to deliver? Does it meet the organization's need as we continue to scale? Because there are always those things that, you need to shore up a team in a certain area. We need to be able to accomplish that at the same time. And then you've got some things that are not really the fun things that you get to invest in the future that you got to retrofit something that's already here. So,
sure. I know all about the not so fun stuff, right? That's the world we live in.
Exactly.
Nobody gets excited about, connectivity or, endpoint management or, all the things that, as I like to joke that we're the offensive linemen of the business world, right? That if we do this stuff right, nobody notices. We only get noticed when we get a penalty. And that's the way it is.
That's a perfect example in the finance world. I call that payroll.
Right.
As long as everybody
That's a
gets
perfect
paid,
example. Yeah.
everybody's good.
That's right.
If you don't hear anything, it's good.
Exactly. Speaking of that and thinking about investments and taking risk, from a financial perspective, do you feel like the move to cloud technologies and the ability to, having less need for capital on the front end or making investments that, have either longer lead times to return or you're required to make a bigger bet against an uncertain outcome, right? So both of those are sort of two sides of the same coin. Cloud at least has the possibility of helping improve those concepts. Has that been beneficial to you guys? Have you guys been able to use that in terms of being able to take on more risk because of that flexibility?
I don't know that we're quite at the point where we've been able to take on more risk because of it, but I think in the future that would absolutely, because our ability to scale up when needed will be there. So haven't needed it per se, but just regardless of what it is, our ability to dial up or dial back any of our technologies is a pretty critical function versus a CapEx spend to do it.
Right. Right. I mean, everybody's got some seasonality or some variability in the nature of their industry, their work, right? Mm-hmm. It's almost impossible not to.
For sure. And, if you think about premise, employers needed us to assist them with various COVID services during the last, number of years. We had to dial that up quickly and then we dialed it back. And so, that is, Jason may say we didn't have to do anything from a technology perspective and specifically in the infrastructure side on that. But I mean, dialing up and dialing back is very useful,
right?
Regardless.
Right. Okay. We mentioned security a little bit because you can't avoid it in the conversation around technology these days. But when you think about your employees and colleagues, and maybe those in leadership, what are they worrying about the most when it comes to technology? And I guess in your opinion, are they worrying about the right things?
I think that they are worried about the right things. And from my perspective, it's just getting the prioritization right. We've got a fixed dollar amount that we're going to spend, for our conversation a few minutes ago. But I do think that we are worried about the right things. With regard to cybersecurity, I always, think, that's one that, Joey Johnson will raise his hand if he really feels like there is a a threat out there that we're not covered on. And, we're certainly going to cover that whenever that does happen. But he helps us all not lose sleep over that. But it happens. And so we're going to continue to invest in the right ways for whatever, but we're going to prioritize outside of keeping our data safe.
Yeah, sure. I mean, obviously, as a healthcare company, right, with PHI and the requirements and the real costs associated with not protecting that information, right? That has a tendency to keep an organization very focused, right? We certainly see in our work with clients in different industries. I mean, everybody's cognizant of the risk, but those that have regulators who are staying close with them about what they're doing there and the potential for financial, consequences on the, in terms of a breach, it does tend to change the conversation. No question about that.
And if you just think about our banking and aerospace and defense customers, they are, they have a pretty high bar that, that we try to exceed, honestly. And I think the high trust certification that we've been able to get on primary apps, those are things that external review of it gives us some comfort, but it's 2023. And, so we'll always continue to be a priority, I think, from this point forward.
Yeah, I think, with the idea behind the zero trust model, which is the assumption that you're going to have a breach. The question is, where is it going to be, and can you keep it, can you keep it small, right? Mm-hmm. That's an acknowledgement of something that I think a lot of us in technology have not really wanted to acknowledge, particularly given the models we had before, with sort of the castle and moat strategy, or whatever you want to call it, right? Or, the walled gardens and VPNs, and sort of, we'll make sure nobody can ever get in and we don't have to worry about it. And, we haven't been able to keep that. The internet does not allow us, really, sort of the nature of connectivity and work styles does not allow us to be successful with that. So you guys have had no choice but to deal with that as well, just like everybody else.
Everybody else. Yes.
Yeah. I guess some examples would be maybe helpful, or if you've got any offhand. And when we think about worrying, in the context of IT and security, do you have any examples? And it doesn't have to be from premise; it could be in the past, of like some good security-based decisions you guys made that both you felt like did what you needed them to do from a security perspective, but were really solid from a financial perspective. Maybe they were clever, or maybe they were some sort of risk management that saved money but did the job in a way that you felt like the pairing of finance and technology did a great job sorting out.
I would go to the high trust certifications, especially in and around Epic, because they do host our application, our primary care application. That to us, because we had so many varied audits that were coming in from different security teams from our customers, because they were, we're a supplier, and they were providing their data to us. They want to make sure that it is secure. Without that, there would have been no number of security team members that we would need just to, fund those audits and just make sure that we got them done. So I would point to that as one of our key great examples where we partnered together to get that. Those teams worked really hard. Yeah.
And what was that timeline? What was that implementation process? How did that tax you as an organization to get there?
It was, you still have to keep the lights on and continue to do those audits while you're also building out, what is required from a high trust perspective. And it's not a one and done. You have to continue to hit those. So I would say that, the initial implementation was probably a couple of years, but I think that we have to do it every third year now. We have to go through that recertification process.
It's like SOC 2. I mean, you're never done.
Yes,
right?
You're never done, and there's always going to be a higher bar to hit. And customers are going to continue to push that threshold up. So staying in line with what is happening nationally there is what is required of our teams here. They do a good job.
Yeah. Gotcha. Okay. I mean, it's clear that, the complexity of doing IT in healthcare is, it's a challenge, right? But given the regulatory infrastructure, given are we a technology company or healthcare? All of the things we talked about, the interrelationships. What do you, when you guys think about challenges, as you sort of look down the road, and not super far, maybe the next 2, 3, 4 years, what do you feel like are the biggest challenges as they relate to the technology side of the house? Is that getting the right people, making sure you have the right technologies? Is it dealing with regulation? I mean, I know it's all of those things, but in terms of sort of forced ranking or what's top of mind, bucket those out for me.
I think that, we have, a list of things that we want to do from a technology perspective. We've got the dollars that, we have allocated to do them, and then we've got to have the talent to do them. So, I could easily reverse that and say we need the talent to do it so that, we can efficiently, march down our prioritization path, because I really feel like all of them are really significant. And that's part of that trusted partnership and balance that you have to have with the CFO and the CIO, because when they tell you they need talent, you got to be able to believe that they really do need talent. And certainly in the last number of years, talent has been sparse. It's more expensive than it used to be. And if you do what's right by your team members and do pay them more, then you're not investing in the next thing that they really need to help them scale to bring on that next chunk of business. And so it's a difficult puzzle to put together. And I continue to say that trusted relationship between your finance partner and your technology partner is super critical.
Makes sense.
I would not want to do it if you didn't trust that you could say, here's what I need, and be able to have that open conversation. It wouldn't be a fun thing to do.
Yeah. And it sounds like, your career path speaks to that, right? Given the fact that you continue to work with folks that you do trust, right? That's that getting the band back together, so to speak, is part of that story, I would assume.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah. As you look ahead, you think about Premise. We'll start with the company, and then we'll talk about Shannon individually. What excites you about the next 2, 3 years? What really gets you kind of going as you think about the company's chart or sort of progression?
I think that I would say that we've had, we're sitting in an amazing spot where we can, absolutely prove the outcomes where, we can deliver better care with easier access to the members of our customers, and we can do it and save the customer money with all-in costs. That's a win-win-win for the patient, for us, and for our customer. There's not a lot of companies out there that can put all three of those together and say we've got a win-win-win proposition. So, super exciting that we have that. I think that, we have, delivered, that message has continually been delivered and shown in the marketplace, so that we're sitting above 97% client retention. Our average clients stay, 18 to 20 years. We've had our highest grossing awarded revenue year ever this year. One of our key awards this year, which I'm not saying anything out of school because they released it, Google. We were awarded the Google contract, which is, fantastic. So we'll open,
congratulations.
Nearly 20 health centers for them across the country. So I think we are positioned really, really well. I think that it goes back to that scale and being able to make sure that we continue to march these investments forward. We keep our teams happy so that we can, continue that path forward into 25 and beyond. Because I think we're in a unique position in comparison to our competitors because we are profitable. Our competitors, for the most part, are not, and we will continue to drive that forward because we're going to be disciplined on the finance side too.
Gotcha. So on the flip side of that question, what scares you about that same time frame? What are things that keep you up at night?
Being able to execute some of these investments that we've made. We do expect a lot of our talented teams here. And to the extent that we are marching forward to, be able to take risk, while we are fee for value today, that's change management for our organization. And we have it both, on the data side, completely. But how value-based care actually works, how we think it will work when its time really comes, that's change management that we've got to get through the entire organization. So that keeps me up at night, because if you miss on that, then it doesn't matter what you invest on or in, you'll not be successful.
Sure. So this is a sidebar question. And the idea of value-based care and sort of fee for outcome as opposed to fee for service. How does that relate to what I'm old too. I'm 50. Well, I don't know how old you are. I'm old. And I remember the managed care sort of revolution of the 80s and capitation models and some things that were talked about. Where does this fit in that sort of process? Because that's more just education. I'm really just curious more than anything else.
Yeah. So, I mentioned that I was with Coventry. So that was staff model, HMO, straight up capitation.
Phil Bredesen, pioneering for sure.
I was a child then, and I'm not sure that I really understood what capitation meant, but certainly the delivery of services from a primary care setting where you have, primary care, and but it's a broad definition of primary care, certainly came through. And so we basically ask our customers to pay all of the expenses to run the center, and pay us a management fee. So it's cost plus or fixed fee right now. So we don't put constraints on a provider who's going to spend extra time with a member, because it's about helping them avoid more expensive downstream healthcare, but really to help them find the right path for getting better and being more productive for the employer. And what ends up happening is it is a lower cost. So, as we can move along the path, as employers, as these double-digit, healthcare costs continue to rise, employers are going to take, more and more. They're going to pay more attention to, how they can vertically integrate healthcare into their ecosystem to drive those savings.
Got it. So my thinking on that wasn't wrong then, in terms of this. You guys are really sort of a continuation of that thinking and that model from that time period.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And if we do these big data projects, if we get them completed as anticipated, it's a step into the direction where we could, as an organization, begin to think about taking risk.
Gotcha. Because then you can demonstrate. Here's where I see that you're looking for some feedback, a feedback loop, so to speak. I would imagine from that service delivery.
Exactly.
Yep. Makes sense. All right. So last question before we sort of wrap up. You've had a long career of doing interesting things on the finance side. You've also had sort of an entrepreneurial experience in your purview, but also I would imagine that was a stretch in some regards because it was a little bit some new things there. What lays down the what's in the future for you? You're still having fun where you are? Have you thought about what might be next at some point, whether that's at Premise or somewhere else? I mean, I know that's a speculative question, but I was just curious more than anything else.
I think that I'm still having fun. I see myself at Premise, for a while. Certainly, as Omer's is the sponsor. They're a great sponsor to work with. I have an amazing, talented team here. I cannot tell you how amazing and talented they are. I mean, we do overall as an organization have a talented team. And, I think the question for me is, at what point do I move aside and let those guys run because they're ready? And, we'll know when the time is right. But, I'm having fun and probably doing a little more mentorship for the team than, some of the CFO work, because those guys are killing it.
Gotcha. Excellent. So to wrap up, I always like to ask, some kind of a little bit of a personal question to close us out. Not personal like that, but, could you share something with us that you've read or watched lately that you think other people ought to check out?
I specifically probably I read a lot about the AI and those things that are coming forward. So I actually watched the presser that Microsoft did about the generative AI yesterday, and how they're going to basically become the Apple Store, I think, of AI models. So to me, I think whether you're in technology or finance or marketing or sales or anywhere, that we should all be particularly aware of what's going on with AI, because it's one of those things that could pop up and change the world pretty quickly. And if you're not aware of what's going on, you might miss something.
For sure. Well, Shannon, that's all I've got. Listen, I'll let you get back to it. Thank you so much for being on Cut the Shit.
It's great to see you.
Have a great rest of the day. It's good to see you too. Take care.
Great. Take care. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Shannon. See you. We hope you enjoyed this episode. If you were enjoying the podcast, we'd appreciate it if you would become a subscriber wherever you get your podcasts. And if you could rate and review the show on Apple Podcasts and Spotify, that would really help us out. Or you can just go old school and tell your friends, your family, your colleagues, and hell, anybody else who you think might want to hear something like this to listen in. If you're on social media, make sure to follow us on TikTok at CutTheShitPod, all one word, where we post lots of clips from the podcast. And last but not least, you can also watch the YouTube version of the show on our YouTube channel at Plow Networks. Until next time, take care and have a great day.